Next, I'd like to introduce to you Michael Sorich. He's going to speak to us tonight about a little bit of the value add of testifying experts in personal injury cases. Thanks,
All right. Yeah, thank you.
Apologize. We had such a good turnout, but unfortunately, I think people got a little bit chilly, and they thought they might have to run home early. So
No worries. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, yeah. Where's our little IT man, Andre? Perfect. The tall IT man.
Oh, we got a new one thrown out here?
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, Amy, for having me. Thank you, Exigent. My talk kind of dovetails into what we just talked about, the use of experts in a case. What I would like to do is kind of walk you through a case that my firm, Cavanagh Law Group, recently had. Once we get there we go. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Sure. So just to kind of walk you through the fact pattern first here. So we represented a lady who was struck by a train at 87th and Cottage Grove here in Chicago. And again, I want to just kind of walk through this. So this is an aerial overhead view of the train station that she actually went on the train from the station virtually every single day of her life. So on this particular day, she was coming down the street. This is 87th Street, and I'll just point up here. The train station is over 87th Street here. So on this particular day, our client, she went in, if you can picture this here, so she goes up the steps and then walks across and goes over to wait for her train, which was a Metro train. We had several experts in the case, which I'll get to in just a couple of minutes, one of which provided a 3D laser scan of the train station itself, just to provide the jury with a perspective of the overview. But essentially, what we're looking at here, there's two sets of commuter tracks. I'm not sure if my laser will work here on the screen, but going from right to left on the screen is going towards downtown Chicago, and then obviously going the other way is the south side. So this is the electrical line on the Metro. And so our client, she came up the stairs and she walked across this walkway and then went through that little house. It was a warming house to the other side of the station. So she's up on the platform and she's waiting for her train. It's middle of the day. And again, we're at a vantage point where we're looking towards downtown Chicago. Well, our client was going south, back to her house that day. She was 63 years old, retired. And what's unusual about this particular station, again, this is one of our experts that lasered the scene, lasered the station to provide the yellow lines where passengers who are getting on the train need to stand behind. But what's unusual about this station is they have this sign, and it's called a flag stop station. You see a lot of these out west in states like Utah, Arizona, where you literally have to stand in view of the train engineer and flag down the engineer for the train to stop. A little unusual in Chicago, but in the middle of the day, our client, who had ridden this train every single day of her life, knew that if she wanted to get on that train, she needed to stand in view of that engineer and flag down the train.
Surely it
Where
should
is this?
Surely it should be flagged down a lawyer.
Yeah, well,
What town is this?
this is in Chicago, 87th and Cottage Grove. So on this particular day, our client, middle of the day, she hears an announcement over this loudspeaker, and the loudspeaker's facing north, and she hears that due to track construction, she needs to go to the lower level and wait for further instructions. So our client does as what she's told. She goes back through that warming station down to the lower level, down to this area, which see this, but she walks down through this chain that's off the latch, and she's standing in this area waiting for the train. Now, again, she knows it's a flag stop station, and from her vantage point right here, the conductor's going to blow right past her. So she steps out towards the tracks, and unbeknownst to her, because the instructions didn't provide her this information, Metra reversed the flow of traffic. So as she's looking for that train coming north to south, a southbound train came and struck her from behind going 40 miles an hour. So what we were left with was a woman who had a brain injury, catastrophic injuries. She survived this collision, but had no memory at all, either before the crash, after the crash. She had absolutely no recollection of who she was or anything of her life. So obviously,
Can I just ask what program you used for that reconstruction?
I would have to defer to one of our experts, which I'm going to get to in just a second here on that. Sure. So what we were left with was a woman with catastrophic injuries. And obviously the damages in this case spoke for themselves. I mean, we had a physiatrist, a life care planner. This woman needed 24/7 attendant for the rest of her life. She was 63 years old, had just retired, had many years left in her life. We had a neuro-ophthalmologist, we had a neurologist, but again, the damages themselves, based on her brain injury, she had a open book pelvic fracture. The damages were significant, but the issues we had in this case was, how do we prove liability? Because we have a woman here who doesn't remember anything, and there were no eyewitnesses other than that train conductor who, of course, the train conductor, he was saying, well, she was standing on the tracks. She shouldn't have been standing there. So our firm, what we needed to do was put together a team of experts in order to prove this liability. And it was a tough liability case for us. And what we did was we had a team of experts here, and I'm just going to briefly kind of walk through each one of them and why it was so important to put this all together and all these pieces together in order for the jury to understand why this tragedy happened. So the first expert we hired was an audiologist, and the reason we did this was because the one and only speaker was facing northbound on the upper platform. Well, again, as I told you folks, they told her to go down to the lower platform, and just before the train came, there was another announcement saying, a train is approaching, stand behind that line. Well, from the lower platform, based on the positioning of that speaker, you couldn't hear that announcement. So we had an audiologist, an acoustical specialist who went out and actually measured the decibel level, and you essentially couldn't hear anything until that train was right on top of you. We had a couple of design safety experts, a train operations expert.
No cameras at all around that?
There was a surveillance camera that was inside that warming station. So we saw our client come in, and then we saw her leave, but there was no context other than her inside of that warming station.
One more thing. What year was this?
The actual crash occurred in 2012. Believe it or not, this train station is essentially identical today as it was then. It's still a flag stop station. Nothing has changed. So we had a transportation safety engineer essentially go out and he lasered the measurements to show what is considered the foul of the tracks. And obviously that's the danger zone here. And based on the width of the train and the foul of that tracks, anyone in that area, which the Metra essentially directed her to this location, it was a tragedy waiting to happen. And he was able to identify the field of vision if you're standing within the foul of the tracks, and then if you have to actually stand in that foul of the tracks, as Metra told her to stand in view of the engineer, how this tragedy all occurred. this particular expert was crucial because he was able to demonstrate to the jury, which is one of the most important things, in my opinion, what you have to do. It's not only to show the jury what happened here, but how it could have been rectified. And basically, we had several different types of guards, and many of these fences, we actually priced these out. I mean, there were only a couple $100 that could have been put out there in terms of paint, yellow lines, fences, that could have been put out in place in order to prevent this. And then, again, we had a railroad operations, we had a rail passenger safety engineer, and I have to give a shout out to Larry Wolf, who I think is here tonight, who put me in touch with Nancy Grugel. Dr. Grugel was our human factors expert in this case, who was remarkable. And again, talking about, it's one thing just talking about, how things should be done, but to be able to identify from the get-go, starting with that inadequate instructions, all the way to how this should have been done and how the reasonable safe design could have been put on this particular train station to avoid the catastrophic injuries to our client. So again, I just wanted to demonstrate the importance of experts in a case like this where we had a plaintiff who couldn't tell her story, and we were able to successfully do that through our experts, and the way they worked in tandem was phenomenal. So again, I want to thank Nancy, I want to thank Amy, and thank you everybody for allowing me to present here tonight.
Oh, but do tell us the results. We want to know the results.
$7.5 million. Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry?
How did she remember if she lost her memory? How did they...
She had no memory of this. So her daughter had contacted our firm shortly after this tragedy. So her daughter basically got a call from Christ Hospital in Oak Lawn, and from there we had to backtrack and put these pieces together.
Did they offer counter arguments that he blew the horn or it wasn't required and it didn't see her? How difficult?
All of the above. So they said that the train conductor blew the horn, that he tried to brake, that she was standing on the tracks. They made an argument that she was trespassing by standing on the tracks. So it was a very disputed liability case. But again, because of our experts and the team we put together, it was a phenomenal result. So.
Well done, Nancy.
All right. Thanks again.